You know, watching pictures of the Beirut port explosion, the mushroom cloud, the shockwave flattening everything in its path, just look at it. What came to mind for me was a nuclear bomb test of Hiroshima, of Nagasaki, but this was the 21st century in a city I have visited so many times. What kind of incompetence allowed what's been described as an accident waiting to happen to actually happen? And how to find out what really went wrong. This is Roundtable. Good to have your company. I'm David Foster. Lebanese authorities say they don't want an international investigation. They'll look into it themselves. But with corruption and vested interests, can they be trusted?
The deadly blast in August that killed more than 190 people and injured thousands of civilians was caused by 3,000 tons of highly explosive ammonium nitrate. It had been stored at Beirut port for at least 6 years, and still there are few details of its origin, its owner, and why it was not removed. Neighborhoods were destroyed and nearly 300,000 people were left homeless as the blast caused damage worth billions of dollars. According to experts, it was one of the strongest non-nuclear explosions ever recorded. The Lebanese government resigned amid mounting anger over the explosion. But that's not enough for many people who want an independent international investigation. After years of corruption and chaos, Lebanon was already in crisis before the explosion hit. Protesters say only a proper, transparent investigation will give them hope for the future.
I'm very pleased to say that we can welcome to the round table from Beirut, the Lebanese capital, Diala Chehade, international criminal law expert. We travel to the west coast of the USA, to Oregon, and say hello to Professor Michael Fakhri, UN Special Rapporteur, who's asking the UN Human Rights Council to demand an independent inquiry. And in London, we can say hello to Maha Shuayb, Director of the Centre for Lebanese Studies. Good to have all three of you on the programme. Michael, I'm going to start with you first of all, and we'll talk about this demand for an inquiry a little bit later. But I want to ask you about your family, your immediate family in Beirut. You say they were badly affected.
Yes, my parents happened to be at St. George Hospital just for a checkup, and St. George Hospital was one of the hospitals very near the blast. And so when the blast happened, the roof collapsed on my father, and miraculously my mother was unscathed. And my father basically, he recounted to me what he thought were his final moments, and somehow he managed to come out from the rubble and described to me what he saw was injured people everywhere, bodies, and I saw pictures of him, and he was a bloody mess. But thankfully, he's okay. So they were affected, but we were lucky compared to many others. And really, I think this is in the end a collective trauma for everyone in Lebanon and for Lebanese people everywhere.
Yeah, 170 plus dead, many more still missing. I want to ask you how far away they were from the explosion to get an idea of the extent of what happened.
I don't know exactly. I mean, I should have probably checked, but the St. George Hospital was in effect almost obliterated. I want to say a couple of kilometers at most. It was one of the hospitals. There's two other hospitals, the Rosary Hospital and Karantina, which were blown to bits. I mean, is the best description. It was really hollowed out, and where a large number of deaths occurred.
Diala, let me come to you. The President Aoun, says an international investigation will dilute the truth. What is Beirut today like?
Okay, Beirut has been suffering for years. Accumulated corruption, dysfunctional governments, apparatus forces, the rule of militia leaders, who are in the same time parties sharing the government in a coalition, what is used to be called a national coalition, which is basically a bunch of warlords who have been ruling this country since the civil war. Since 17 October and until at least the explosion of the 4th of August, thousands and dozens of thousands of Lebanese has went to revolt and to protest against the government, which led to the shut of the first government of Hariri and the establishment of another government which also resigned after the Beirut blast. There is no trust at all among the Lebanese people today.
Can I ask you this? When I first visited Beirut, I think it was 1985, the war was still going on. Time and again I was told, give us peace and we will rebuild. Why do the Lebanese people continue to have to put up with what you've described and a situation that appears never to change, perhaps get worse?
Simply because Lebanese people didn't have the chance to live a normal political life. We were almost basic in reality, we were occupied by the Syrian regime until 2005. After 2005, series of assassinations, terrorist attacks, wars in the north and the south, the intervention of the Hezbollah in Syria, all this transformed Lebanon in a moment or in an era that is supposed to be the moment to build the new independent Lebanon. We hoped as Lebanese that after 2005, then we will be able to build a new Lebanon, an independent Lebanon, to run our own politics. And then we couldn't do this simply because the security situation in Lebanon, which many believe was used as a tool to destabilize the country, to continue to keep the same authority by the same people who were running the country even before 2005.
Okay, can I bring in Maha, Diala, if you don't mind, because I know you wanted to say something either in response or to add to what's already been said.
I would like to respond to your question. I think it's Macron Initiative. Just initiatives like that are one of the main reasons why Lebanese cannot build their state. And
explain to our audience what that Macron Initiative is.
Macron
President of
Initiative,
France.
basically, following the explosion, we see a president of France, Macron, coming to Lebanon. And basically, what is he trying to do? He's trying to give this regime, again, another chance. It's because of this international intervention that is always putting the benefits of the regional powers at the expense of the agency of the people. It's because of that the Lebanese, various attempts to reform, to revolt, to change the system has been failing. It's the same, it happened with the Ta'if Agreement, first of all, the civil war, then the Ta'if Agreement, which basically, what did the Ta'if Agreement do? It kept the same militiamen, 7 militiamen, they have been ruling us since the civil war up to now. And all the regional powers, whether Iran, France, Syria, Saudi Arabia, everyone is doing their best. And they're solving their problems. They're making deals at the expense of us, the people. And this is, I think, what is most frustrating about what's happening in Lebanon. I've been living in Lebanon for the past 10 years. I've just decided to leave now in the past 2 weeks to reallocate to England because of the explosion. We've all lost hope. We've lost hope that, unfortunately, that we, the people, can have agency to change. And this is why I'm very devastated by Macron's attempt, because again, it's giving them another chance.
So this is from Lynn Malouf from Amnesty International. More than a month after the explosion, every step, measure or statement taken thus far, particularly by the highest-ranking officials in the country, have made it clear that the authorities have no intention whatsoever of fulfilling their responsibilities of conducting an effective, transparent and impartial investigation. They're frightened of what?
Of challenging their authority, changing this pact that they have, where they all basically power sharing. This sectarian system is all about power sharing, not really among sects. It's among a small oligarchy of militiamen. That's how the system has been working, and they're getting the support of France, of Iran, all of these Paris 1, 2, 3, all of these different attempts. It's always continuously supporting this regime. Maybe there was a decision before this explosion to corner them, And this is why when the explosion happened, if you hear what President Aoun said, he said it's an opportunity. How could a president of a country see an opportunity in explosion? He saw it as an opportunity for pumping dollars back into the country, and where no one wanted to support this again. This is why I think it's a pact. There are deals. I think maybe now there's an attempt to corner Hezbollah more, get more power from Hezbollah, and I think the decision of the international tribunal is one step in that direction. It's kind of like pinching Hezbollah, but not completely, demolishing their power. And I think there's an attempt to reshuffle the agreement at the moment.
So let's talk about this international inquiry, which you, Michael, among other rapporteurs, have called for, the official investigation into the assassination of former Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. Took 14 years, but we've only just had the results of it. It's been widely condemned as being ineffective, that nothing will change. So why would anything that the UN Human Rights Council decides to do or talk about make one little bit of difference? Why would it change anything?
So just let me talk about the Special Tribunal for Lebanon and agree that it was a sham. It was approximately 15 years. It cost about $970 million, which included an investigation and the tribunal itself. And $400 million came from the Lebanese public coffers, from Lebanese taxpayers. And it didn't serve the people. It didn't serve the country, and it served a very narrow set of geopolitical interests. And I really appreciate Dr. Maha Shuayb's metaphors. At best, if anything, it pinched Hezbollah. So Lebanese people are rightfully cynical about anything to do with the international system. I called upon the UN Human Rights Council to do something only because that is only one avenue we can look to that is different and that is human rights based. Will it work or not is also an open question. So will the Human Rights Council take up the agenda of Lebanon? That's an open question. Will other special rapporteurs like myself focus on the issue of Lebanon? That's an open question. So what I'm doing is pushing and struggling to get this on the agenda, because our only hope in Lebanon is for a multilateral process that is based on human rights principles. And what human rights principles means is focusing on people in Lebanon, all people, whether they're citizens or not, on their rights and therefore the obligations of the government and the obligations of international governments. So to build on what Maha said, so when Macron shows up, the grand savior from France, who thought in this day and age we'd still have to deal with the French in Lebanon? How do we hold him accountable and his government accountable? Because the interests of France and other countries, it's not just France, it's China, it's the United States, this is a business opportunity. Even before the explosion, everyone's trying to get a piece of making money in Lebanon.
Yeah, let me also read out some of the other countries that you've mentioned besides France and the United States: Russia, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Iran, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, China. They would all need to step back, you say, for any kind of inquiry to be at all likely to produce any sort of impartial results. That's not going to happen, surely.
So to say that's not going to happen is to give up, right? So the question isn't whether we're hopeful or not, but it's a struggle. It's a struggle. And so I put it before the Human Rights Council. I put it before the international community, and it's for them to respond and then to lay bare the hypocrisy. If they don't respond accordingly, if the system isn't multilateral, if all attempts to reconstruct and rebuild Lebanon are not based on proper, legitimate human rights principles, what that will do to people in Lebanon, it'll reveal the hypocrisy, and it'll not allow any politicians to say one thing and to do another. So in the least, by pushing and by struggling, at best, if we're lucky, it can empower people to see what's truly going on. Because people in Lebanon are not fools. As we heard from the other speakers, we've all been through this for decades now. And the Lebanese system is designed from the minute of independence from France. It's designed to allow the oligarchs to divide the country, to then bring in other forces to conquer the country. And so now they're swarming, all these other powers are swarming in a way. But the world isn't just those powers that I listed as you noted. The world's a bigger place in many other countries, and many other people have experienced similar things and have dealt with both corrupt governments and an international community ruled by geopolitical forces that don't do anything. And so the international community writ large, whether it's international civil society, movements and other countries that see this as a human rights issue can step up, can work together, and there are moments where that does work.
Okay, Diala, I'm looking at you. I'm afraid I don't know your age, but I imagine you've grown up in a Lebanon that's known nothing but sectarianism, perhaps some violence, but maybe at the end of the Civil War, you were there, now corruption, etc. How do you go about changing something that has been endemic to you and your generation for all of your lives?
We have no choice but to rely on democracy to make a change, to make a peaceful change in the government. But at the same time, we did not have yet normal or idealistic electoral system. The electoral systems and laws were always designed to put up with the interest of the ruling parties ever since the Civil War. Now the mass...
Can I just explain for our viewers that means that there's power sharing between three different ethnic groups, between Prime Minister, President, and Speaker of the House. And you reckon that they each work together, perhaps, to make sure that they themselves are protected?
Mainly with some of the parties, such as Hezbollah, Amal Party, which is the party of the Parliament Speaker, the Christian parties such as the Phalangists and the Lebanese Forces, the Free Patriotic Movements, which is the party of the president of the country, which started to participate in the ruling of this country at least 10 years ago. They vote to make a change. They ended up participating in corruption.
Yeah, and I don't want to knock your idea that you have to have a democratic process, but I want to try and establish, and Maha, let me come to you at this point, how that process can be achieved. A fair and equitable process that sees the ordinary people of Lebanon able to, as I was told, rebuild because you have peace and time on our side. When the country has got 1.5 million refugees, this is from H.R. McMaster, former White House National Security Advisors, 1.5 million refugees, garbage and pollution crisis, dilapidated power, currency losing 80% of its value since October, poverty rate rising to a projected 75%, and COVID highlighting the inadequacies of the healthcare system. It's not something that can be done without inside intervention. How do you prevent those from the outside using it to their own ends?
Okay, first of all, I want to say the refugee card is always used, particularly by the regime, to explain why the country is struggling economically. And I think this is a discourse that is totally, not accurate. These are all outcomes, and the currency, inflation, etc. All of these are outcomes of the system that has basically exploited all the resources of the state to their own, to their bank accounts. I don't think an early election will solve the problem. I think what we need now is really an independent government, and I think this new Prime Minister who has been appointed by the French and named directly by the French, and then the other Berri and the rest were invited to the parliament to approve his nomination. But he is not independent. He does not represent the aspirations of the uprising. And I think it's time to listen to the requests of this revolution, of the uprising. It's time to stop washing it aside. We need an independent government, and I don't talk about a bureaucratic kind of government. No, we want a political government that really works on re-establishing a proper state and deconstructing the sectarian regime that I don't think it even represents the sectarian groups, or it even looks after their well-being. It looks after the well-being of these particular political parties that have been ruling us. I think this is the transitional government